Hello, everyone. You are live with Chris and Jeff on Your Bytes and Your Rights, session 8. Today, we're going to talk about DSARs, data subject access requests, as well as privacy agents, companies that help you process and activate your rights to get your data, whether that's delete your data, get access to your data, sometimes activate your ability to tell companies that you don't want them to sell your data. And there are other actually data subject access rights that don't get mentioned a lot, like the right of data portability. But that's becoming more popular in privacy laws as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about those things and how those laws are proliferating. And what that really means, because frankly, there's a big disconnect. Privacy laws are giving us these rights, but there's no real effective implementation mechanism for consumers to actually utilize those rights. And the real problem is that every company is essentially building their own process to implement those rights, because all that information is stored in databases, and everybody's database and everybody's process is a little bit different. So that's not real. I mean, I guess that's sort of like an obvious thing, right? But when you think about 4,000 plus data brokers, and I think that number is probably a lot larger now. And as well as all the other brands and other organizations that collect your data, that really means that it's a task that's impossible for a consumer to actually implement if they wanted to actually scour their personal information from the internet. And so, how do we reconcile those two things? The fact that you have the ability to and the right to get your personal information from these companies, but really not the wherewithal to actually accomplish that task. And so, Chris, you want to say a couple words about your thoughts on the subject?
Sure. Yeah, I have had this thought for a long time that we should have kind of a what I call do not call list on all your data, kind of like you have a do not call list on your phone number, that if and when and where you get a phone call and that wasn't scrubbed against that list, then there's an automated fine attached to that. I think this should be true for bytes as well. So for anything that should rightfully be yours, which I include all what I call digital dust in. And from that perspective, like the first time I uttered the sentence that we created a digital landfill was in 2008. And so as far as I'm concerned, we just need to clean up this digital landfill while we're building a new system that actually allows you to be an agent in the network rather than what you are now, which is kind of an oracle function or a non-player character depending on what platform you're engaging with, right? So the typical example is when you are on Google, you're not a user, you're a product that Google is selling, but is much worse, right? You're a non-player character in a game called Google, and you're top of funnel as soon as you enter the first character into that. And to me, that's the opposite of what we were trying to build when we set out to build what we call the World Wide Web. And actually, my position has been for a long time that we never built the World Wide Web, we built the commercial web, and that's what we're trying to fix right now. But yeah, in the meantime, there's lots of opportunities to go after these legacy violations and these companies that, from where I'm sitting, should have never existed. I think offering social engineering as a service shouldn't be a business model. And even that they cannot put up these hurdles to maintain these positions seems kind of absurd where I'm coming from. I taught privacy law for a short time right after law school many moons ago. And a lot of the things that are possible in the United States context were always illegal, in Germany specifically, where I learned law, so to speak. Anyway, but yeah, that's why we do what we do. We're going to keep doing this until this is fixed. And if it takes 10 years, it will take 10 years. If it takes 20 years, it will take 20 years, but it has to be done. But yeah, maybe we'll hand it off to our experts for today, starting with Carrie.
Yeah, we've actually got two experts here. So we've got Carrie Lenning, and we've also got Darius Bella Jevis. Is that how you pronounce your last name, Darius?
It's actually Berayevas, but don't even try it.
Yeah, I really bastardized that. Sorry. I think we're going to let Darius talk first. So why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Jeff. And yeah, Chris, that's a good goal to have. I think we're thinking very similar in that regard. Right. So I'm CBDO at Surfshark and also leading the development of our new service, Incogni. So just quickly, Incogni is a consumer service. So for the users, where we automate the process of the data removal from data brokers. Uh, there are several services like that. What we do different than most, I think, is that we don't limit ourselves to United States market. So we are serving users from US and EU, meaning that we're also leveraging GDPR for our European customers. And we're also not limiting ourselves to people search sites. So generally, those services, it's a bit different approach when you can look into like what results, what companies have about a person. So yeah, also, what's probably worth mentioning is that right now, when it comes to data brokers, our focus is on companies and services where the user gets like no benefit. So we don't want to accidentally delete an account that user actually gets some value from and that they consciously created. We're focusing on companies that where in most cases users never even heard that, and somehow they do have personal information about them, often sensitive personal information. With that said, we do look at this as a sort of like emerging area, and like there's still a lot to do, and the end goal is to be able to provide a service where removing personal information that from companies that you don't want them to have it is as easy for the user as it was for the companies to collect it. The way we got into this, so I'm not sure if how many of our listeners heard about Surfer before, but in most cases, like it's about our VPN. But we are a cybersecurity and privacy suite, the way we see ourselves. And how we started working on this problem was that just over a year ago, maybe a year and a half, we did a survey with our users which asked, okay, so what do you need your help with in this area? And this was one of the answers that was more commonly referred to. And so we tried to do it ourselves. We found a list of data brokers and just our management team, a few people, tried to delete our personal information. And I think the longest, like we managed to go for like 2 weeks, and just in terms of like the process until your mailbox gets overwhelmed, the answers and the conversations they're getting like too frustrated and just go, okay, this is broken. Like this can be like it can't work like that. So yeah, we then move on to like finding volunteers and to actually like do the test and to map out like the processes. Like we started outreaching companies, asking for data removal requests, mapping out the flows. And admittedly, there are very legit companies that do have simple processes for the users to remove their information, but at the same time, and often with the big data brokers, it's the case of like multiple layers and very sophisticated dark patterns used against the users to discourage them from like exercising the right. Yeah, so maybe just a sort of quick intro.
Yeah, that's nice, Darius. I think it's really interesting. I think you're the first privacy agent that I've seen that is really focusing primarily on data brokers, on third party data brokers, rather than just anybody that has data on you. Um, I know that when I sort of started compiling a database of data brokers myself, I sort of took more of an expansive definition of the term data broker. And we had this conversation, several months ago about what actually is a data broker. Is Google a data broker, for instance? And obviously, depending upon what your definition is, right, they have generally a first party relationship with most of their consumers, right? And people are getting value out of that relationship. Whether that relationship is asymmetrical or not is maybe a different question, right? But at least people know that they have a relationship with Google. And so you're focusing not so much on those kinds of relationships, but the relationships with people that are aggregating profiles on consumers that have no idea that they're actually even collecting that data, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it does, as I mentioned earlier, like it is a complex multi-layer problem. And I think eventually, yeah, we will need to start thinking, okay, so how do we deal with like Google, with Facebook, meaning like services where user might want to continue using the service. They might feel like they are getting the value. And it's more about that data not being misused, or just maybe the user is fine with the usages. But anyway, yeah, it is a very complicated issue, and we are starting at the sort of like, okay, so these are like third party companies that you're not getting any value. So it is making many things easier for us. And at the same time, when we go to the difficult questions of user verification and yeah, like that, so it is it makes easier for us.
Sure. Another thing that I thought was really interesting that I have not seen other companies do is that when you are bringing customers on board, you're actually getting them to grant you a limited power of attorney, which seems really like a great idea. Because I know that you get, well, I don't know about you, but other privacy agents get a lot of pushback from brokers and other entities that they're trying to connect with, right? To implement these automated DSAR transactions. Can you talk about that at all?
Sure, and yeah, we're getting some pushback as well. I can't comment on what other services like the amount, if it's like higher or lower. But yeah, as I said, because it's not just a technical problem when dealing with the data brokers, so we need to mm, like show them some sort of proof like that. Well, we're not just acting because that's what we want to do, but on behalf of the user and as they requested. So this does help. We do make sure that our powers are very limited, and we don't want it. We want it just for like the data removal. So I think that's important for the user. At the same time, there are sort of legal questions related to that because different countries have different jurisdictions and different definitions what they consider like a proper power of attorney, and so there are some nuances and complications here as well.
Interesting. Do we have? I've got lots more questions for Darius, but do we have any questions from the audience for Darius, or from Carrie, for that matter, or from Chris?
Oh, like you, I have a million, as you know. So, but I prefer to let others speak because I tend to rant. So Carrie, you have something specific on your mind?
Yeah, I think so. I think first off, Darius, the Incogni project is interesting, and for the reasons that Jeff mentions, in particular, focusing on the data brokers. One thing that so I should preface and give a little background. I come from it from the standpoint of acting as a data protection officer. So I am one of those people that with some services they're sending it to every controller, or even worse, every company whose email shows up in an inbox, and it's a nightmare to deal with some of the services. I'm not saying you guys. I haven't gotten anything from Incogni, and I don't think I would, because none of my clients are data brokers. But what I always am struck by is that fine line between doing what seems like a very good and noble service, and I agree with what Christian and I think we all I think understand, is that it's a very broken system right now. But filling that role without just creating more noise seems like a very challenging thing. So I'm curious how you guys do that. Like I like the idea of the power of attorney and kind of making it more serious. But I wonder if there's a little bit of if you guys, you mentioned you might be having some uphill struggles with some controllers, and I wonder how much of that is because they've been burned by some of the other systems that are not taking it as seriously. And if you have any thoughts on that.
Oh, definitely. I think you're raising a great point, and I think everyone here understands that the current system is terrible for everyone, not just for users, but for the companies as well. And from our side, one of the reasons why we created Incogni as a separate service and not as just part of the package for Surfshark, is to be mindful of the scale, because when we have a couple of million users, if we introduce something like that to everyone, it quite literally can break many companies' processes and just log them to a standstill. So the way we see it, in the end result is that we will need to work with all the companies, and this is including data brokers. And so far we've had we've been having some good conversations, and we have some good integrations where we have the processes where we're not just randomly spamming on whoever's behalf. So the companies know that we are serious about this, and what this enables us to go into the conversation and say, okay, so how do we adjust the process for your company specific to make it easier to handle and process these requests. At the same time, we also try to get into conversation. So one of the big problems is that when it comes to data brokers and third-party data in general, oftentimes, well, it's quite impossible to know for sure who holds your data. For example, myself, or most people, I think, couldn't say okay, this is the list of companies that hold my data, because oftentimes
we don't know.
There will be hundreds, could be hundreds, or who knows how many companies that have the data. So anyway, what this means that there's sort of a layer of guesswork where you try to make a calculated guess, how likely it is that a particular company might hold the user's data. And what this means is that we do go into conversation with the companies, with the data brokers, and if they say that, okay, so please don't send us data from users from this particular state or country, because we don't collect it there. We make the adjustments and make sure that to limit. It is a sort of learning process that needs adjustment, but that's why we're trying to pace ourselves in terms of scale and to allow the solution and to grow, to make it sustainable for everyone involved.
How do you so I run into this problem a lot because I'm one of the weirdos that A, reads privacy policies, and B, shocking, I know, and B, also I do every 6 months I do a scour of my name on the internet. And so it's my little ego rub to see how many times people have quoted me on things, but also to find out all the people sites, all the people search sites, and the Intellis and all the traditional data brokers that we think of that are at least making the data public. And invariably, I think Intellis is pretty bad, and a few of the others are equally bad. Like, oh God, I can't even think of the name. Pipple, I think, is one of them. They, every 6 months, I send the request. They say, "Oh yeah, we deleted your data. You're no longer being exposed. Your information's clean and gone." And then magically, I still find it again. How do you ensure? What are you doing? What are your processes to make sure that the deletion request is actually sticking?
All right. Yeah, this is a great one. It was a shock for us when doing like the research and the manual testing before we built Incogni, was that very few companies actually have a sort of like suppression lists, meaning that you delete yourself, and then they get a new batch of Excel with some data from whoever they buy it from. They upload it again, and as far as I'm aware, this is quite common with smaller people search sites. They seem to have like the same few providers. So they just import it again, no checks, no whatsoever. So yeah, from our side, we do repeat requests as a service as well, unless we know that they do have a suppression list and they won't re-add it.
That is an interesting problem. I wonder if that's going to cause problems if you keep sending the same request over and over to companies.
It can in GDPR land, sure. A company can basically go in and say if the request is overly repetitious that they don't have to necessarily comply. So it depends on how often, I guess, it's sent out.
Definitely, and yeah, again, from the start, we built with the possibility to make it like custom adjustments for each company that we're working with. So, if we see that they don't have the data for the couple of times, we can increase the scope for like to 6 months to 1 year, whatever we find that is the sort of like good number. Maybe we can talk with them and say, hey, or maybe you have a sort of a variation of suppression list that we didn't know about, and we can just stop the process.
Jeff, can you move Tara up? I think she wants to weigh in on this topic.
Oh, sure. Hey, Tara, how are you? Did you have a question or a comment, Tara?
Voilà. Hi. Good evening, everyone. Good Friday. Just listening to what Carrie was saying. I was wondering how you said you're weird. I'm a double weirdo because I tend to complain quite easily. Why haven't you complained to the DPO? I know you're in Ireland, but have you considered?
So most of the people search companies that I'm dealing with are out of Florida or other states that don't have particularly robust privacy laws, Tara. And so because I'm a little of a weirdo because I am in Ireland, but obviously I'm an American, and so a lot of my stuff shows up because America has appallingly bad privacy laws and appallingly bad data protection provisions in general. And so most of these companies do not have a regulator to report to. In Europe, I think I've only had 1 or 2 cases where I've actually had to send a thing because it's far more tightly regulated. but yeah, when it comes to like Florida or Illinois or some other state, or not Illinois maybe, but some other state where laws don't really exist for data protection or for recognizing subject rights, then there's no one particularly to complain to. If you complain to the AG, they'll just tell you to go pound sand.
Yeah, no, true. I understand.
So Darius, maybe you can answer that for your particular use cases. So aren't you requiring those companies to send back a written statement that they have to certify that they actually deleted the data? And then also as a secondary question to that, what about backups?
So I will need clarification on the backups part, but in terms of responses, so we do ask an email verification. That's just an answer that a statement that they have looked into and like deleted the data, or they have some questions and they need to work with that, or they looked in that they didn't find data for the particular user.
Yeah. In terms of the backups, different laws have sort of different rules on that, Christian. I think most of them sort of say you're supposed to delete backups as well, but if it's too hard, you might not have to.
Gotcha. Now I understood about the backups. We haven't looked into the backups part that much. I think realistically for internet services, there will be certain like data points that should be kept in case of like suppression lists, so the companies don't re-add you. So there will be a sort of layer.
Yeah. I had a question that I wanted to get into, and that is sort of like sort of looking into the future. Obviously, I sort of started out talking about how every company has a different process, and we've got some companies, like some of the bigger ones like OneTrust that have these like frameworks, and Wirewheel, and there's like actually a ton of companies that have got these different DSAR processing frameworks, and a lot of them and other companies, including Surfshark, Darius, have been sort of banding together to try to put together a data rights protocol, along with the Consumer Reports Digital Lab. Can you tell us a little bit about that and your participation in that project?
Of course. So I think it's an amazing initiative from Consumer Reports. As far as I'm aware, they were like the masterminds that initiated the process, and we were just all too excited to join. So the idea here is because right now every company, everyone has like their own processes, and that alone increases the costs and the resources required to process. What we do foresee is that there will be more services like ours in the coming years, so the burden on the businesses will be increasing as well. And as a sort of like work solution, it could be to have a sort of standardized way how these data deletion or do not sell requests should be sent and should be processed, and what information would need to come back to the services, and in that way to reduce the cost and reduce the need for like custom integrations with the different companies and different services. It's still quite early in the process, so we are doing we are about to start some test integrations. But what for me feels like the most promising part is that we do have companies from all sides at the table talking about this, and so far, surprisingly, we are finding like mutual ground and agreement. So it's going to be I think a long way to go, but definitely it looks promising so far.
Interesting. Yeah, thanks for that summary. Prashant, did you have a question?
Yes, thanks, Jeff. Hey, everyone. So, hey, Darius. Hey, Carrie. I think thanks for the insights. I have evaluated various products, including OneTrust, for the role I play, for the various activities. We are trying to perform from a privacy standpoint. My question was around the overall aspect of the the request of processing, right? I mean, typically as Gary, you mentioned about you would like to look at whether the company who is hosting the data has deleted a records truly or not, and every 6 months you go and you still find it, right? My question is more about organizations which are like in a B2B space, like business to business interactions, right? Where there could be multiple layers of nesting of your data. So you may be giving data to company A or organization A, and as part of the business it may be going through multiple nestings. So when you ask for a request of erasure, right, or request to delete, right, how do we put some control functions, control points, and checks where it has been truly deleted from all the layers of business that we are looking at, right? Is the data mapping or the ROPA in technical sense being truly followed? Is there something that you have seen a situation like that, and have you overcome with some strategies?
Are you asking me or Darius?
Yeah, I mean, it was to the question popped up when you explained your situation, and then I think
Yeah.
Darius was also talking about from the Surfshark perspective. So yeah, I mean, either one, but just to the forum, wanted to call that out because that is a common issue I see, especially in the banking sector where we have a lot of applications or a lot of teams which are doing like I would call the affinity marketing affinity, kind of measure of let's say campaigns, etc., where you are going to host data across borders, across different systems, right? And we just want to make sure everything is done right.
I honestly, by the way, I love that question, Prashant, because I think that it gets overlooked a lot. Even in the before the privacy, before the tools have come around, like just answering these kinds of questions, and most controllers just answering these, responding to subject access or to deletion requests, don't think about these things. In the context of GDPR, and to a certain extent under the various state laws in the U.S. And those are really the only groups that I can speak to. Unfortunately, I don't have everyone else's stuff memorized off the top of my head. There are obligations that the controllers also pass these requests on to other upstream controllers or downstream processors that may also have your data, particularly for deletion requests where there's no legitimate grounds, there's no legal basis to continue to process that information. Like say it's a revocation based on consent. That's the easiest one to think about, right? And I don't. It's such a good question because I don't know if there's good processes in place. I would be very curious to find out, for instance, if Darius or if some of the other tools like that are out there that are doing this on a more full scale basis are actually following up and getting confirmation that the deletion requests or the access requests are being passed along to the processors or further controllers, or even within the group of an organization. I mean, you have many cases, situations where one controller is basically a joint controller with another, and they're sharing the information as it within the organization wide. Like one might be in the UK and one might be in France. And we don't have a lot of transparency on that. Darius mentioned the idea of systems and developing better systems. And I think if companies want to start focusing on that and tracing things like data lineage so that you can actually confirm that a deletion request has occurred or that an access request has been fully fulfilled or that an objection to certain processing activities has occurred, I would be all for that. That would be groundbreaking and innovative, and just genuinely impactful. So,
Absolutely.
Darius, if you want to do that, that'd be awesome.
And that's one of the things which I keep on talking to our leadership is essentially, hey, how do I move away from human attestations, and how do I build a process which has these bells and whistles, right, which automatically informs, right, and that comes to the lineage, like how strongly it is embedded. The privacy by design framework is embedded into the overall scheme of the technology landscape
Exactly.
that the team is building. So definitely looking forward.
So a couple of thoughts here. So first, unfortunately, we don't have a sophisticated process for that. What I can share is that from the user perspective, when running the test with the companies, we've seen multiple cases where the response you get from the data broker is a request for the user to specify which entities, which parts of the business do you want the data removed. And so for us, it's a bit easier. We do have the teams that we can research and stuff like that. But from the user's perspective, getting an email like that, an answer like that, it can be intimidating. And even then, it's a sort of well, I don't want, I want the data removed not from a particular entity. Well, I want to remove my information from any entities that you hold. So this is the approach we're taking, is just requesting for a broad request, but we don't have a sophisticated way to make sure that nesting and sophisticated structures, to make sure that it's done accurately.
It's data lineage is what it is. It's actually understanding the where the data is coming from, where it's going, how it's being used, and how it's being and up until the end of its life cycle. And no one, Darius, you're not the only one. Trust me. I used to work for a large social media company, and they didn't have lineage figured out either. No one does, really. It's a very challenging problem. But gosh, it'd be so cool if we could figure it out. that would I think solve a good number of problems, both on the user side, but also on the controller or processor side, on the on the organizational side, in terms of compliance with these things. Because right now it's an exceptionally manual process, and in many organizations, your OneTrusts and your wire wheels and all these other tools are great in theory. They don't necessarily help you in practice always get the data, though. You still have to go do a lot of manual searching and retrieving and things like that.
I think it's a great point. And one thing I would like to add here is that I know that it can be difficult to justify for the management, for the leadership team, to invest enough resources and do more than the bare minimum and so on. It does come down to is there a business case for this? And one thing I do foresee is that with the growth of services like ours, where the amount of requests and increases, and the services also educate the users that they do have these rights, and how it all works. As the requests increase, as the resource intensity for the companies increases, so we will inevitably need to invest in better tools, processes, systems for the companies.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I think when we start talking about copies of data and database technology, that the world we live in today, that it's going to be very hard to get to the data lineage that Carrie rightfully points out as the real solution to this problem. And I don't think anybody solved it. To sort of get back to the original question that Prashant posed, I don't think that there's a good solution there. But maybe Thomas or Jim has an answer or a follow-on question.
We've been working on this for a long time, and we have a solution that can work among the parties that choose to embrace it. We think about things in terms of a protocol layer and a agent paradigm. Christian mentioned agency at the beginning of the call. And what we've essentially built is a system where those parties that run agent applications can share data under contracts which serialize the data. And then where the cryptographically signed copy of that contract, or hash of that contract, is recorded to ledgers to provide immutability that proves what's technically called data provenance, which is this lineage of how the data moves through the system. And you can automate this under framework agreements. Right now we're working with a little group out of Finland called My Data Global. But you could move data around under framework agreements that are human readable and viewed by the parties. The tech is called JLink with a C, JLINC.com. We built a little solution for GDPR too early. And there's a lot of people in the States, there's people at Internet Identity Workshop. Don't know any of the folks, and most of the folks on this call, but it's great to meet you and look forward to talking more.
That sounds interesting. I'm familiar with the My Data stuff, but not that particular solution you just called out. That's got some interesting, yeah. I can see how that could work.
All right, I'm always willing to fill in the blanks, as you guys know, and I can talk about these topics forever and often have. I think ultimately we need to create more profit centers and or gamifications to make these topics interesting, because unlike the people on this call right now, for most people, when they simply heard the term privacy, I think their eyes kind of glare over and they lose interest in the discussion altogether. So I think what we need to really get across is that this is not optional, as in change the current paradigm to where you are not really an operator in the network, you're not a user in the network, and you don't get to set a destination, so to speak, but whoever has more power, as in has more data, has more influence over your decision-making processes, is actually the one driving it. I think this is unsustainable, right? So, but I think there's unlimited opportunities to make money from that particular situation, just starting with the bottom feeders, attacking those. And I think there's many more laws that we actually haven't touched on. When I give these cybersecurity talks, I list like 3 dozen laws, like the ones that were just recently being enforced, like BIPA, like the Illinois biometrics laws. There's other institutions and states that I'm enacting those right now. I think as soon as these become available, people should build what I would call the right forensic tools, and usually it would only start with data aggregation, but then ultimately, and that's always the crux, if you're an attorney, and then I'll probably hand it over to Thomas, then your main problem is always, well, you have to like painfully and painstakingly aggregate kind of the evidence that proves that this particular entity, this particular company shouldn't actually have this data in the first place, right? And they got it without you consenting to them having a copy. So Thomas, have you been able to make any, let's call it, profits from enforcing the rights of your clients in this regard?
No, absolutely. I think.
At least you're honest, Tom.
Yeah, I mean, let's be realistic. People beyond our immediate realm of privacy professionals, people really don't care.
Right.
Unless and until their bank account gets emptied or they find themselves in the wrong end of some kind of aggressive marketing campaign that they didn't expect, unless there's a noticeable harm. And most people are relatively thick-skinned to that because they've been conditioned so by the variety of actors out there in the data brokerage scene. Just think of all the people that remain on Facebook, that remain on Twitter and Instagram and Clubhouse, despite the well-known, well-publicized privacy intrusions that are emanating constantly. It floods the news on a daily basis. And so I think what we're left with is as you said, to design these systems so that the user is automatically protected and shielded from these bad behaviors. And this will come in due time through the use of privacy by design, through the use of personal digital identities that the user is in control of and can lock and unlock through a mechanism such as an NFT, which gives access to his database, and he can turn it on and off at will. Token gate access to his information. But as you've heard over and over again, we're just too early. We're here on the cutting edge of all this stuff, watching it be developed. I was going to make some comments in this regard a little earlier, and then Jim jumped on there and started talking about his solution. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. Slowly, over the course of time, we will get vendors that do find profitable use cases, and they will get these grand ideas and be able to market them and make money on them, not only to the consumer, but to corporations that find privacy, being privacy forward is a benefit and an advantage to them. There are businesses like that out there. So we're seeing this. It grows every day, but it's painstakingly slow to those of us that want these tools yesterday.
Yeah, I think what's valuable here, and that comes back to the fact that we have VCs investing in these type of solutions, is you want to narrow down the particular use cases, i.e. the usual example that I made with a local startup here that specializes on one particular data set, which is that of arrest records. So there is a few hundred databases out there that have these arrest records, and a lot of these arrest records should actually have been deleted by law, right? Because these people actually got off whatever they were accused of, but because of the way this data is being collected, which is literally people walking in the police station and making copies of these records and then selling them to these data brokers, this has real world effects on these individuals, as in they're applying for a job, never getting a call back because their background check comes up with a flag when this flag shouldn't be there. So that you have real harm, but then obviously the forensics on that are really, really hard, right? So to then determine what database, where did this come from, who was actually the culprit, and how many databases does this data sit in, who do we go after, becomes really, really difficult on a practical level. But it's work that has to be done, right? There's 10 to 15 million individuals in the United States that are just affected by this particular example. And then obviously you have a much larger group if you think about minors, right? And there I think the weapons are much larger.
Unfortunately, absolutely nothing will change the market dynamics until you start to get some laws in place and you start to get politicians actually doing something, particularly in the United States. Like, Tara asked me, how come I don't go to, regulatory bodies, for pursuing these things? And it's because there are really very few in the US. There are more in Europe, which is why I don't see these problems as much in Europe. And I think that lack of regulatory and in many respects, that lack of private right of action is going to continue to damage and hinder any development in this, because there is absolutely no incentive right now in the US at all to actually build privacy by design, to actually build in compliance tools to actually track data provenance, as Jim mentioned. There's nothing there. So it's incumbent on, some VCs that might be a little forward thinking. Now, I have deep unquestionable amounts of skepticism when it comes to if this can be done with a Web3 solution. Jeff knows I was going to go there. But it needs to be a multifaceted attack, not just throwing money at a problem and hoping that the market will prevail. We also need to change culture. We need to change mindset. Like right now, I've been reading this book, Industry Unbound, by Ezra Waldman, and it's great because it's a reminder that, I think, Christian, you mentioned it earlier, like we've kind of been brainwashed from, into a perspective about data and into a perspective about, everything has to be consent. In fact, consent, I think, has been mentioned more times than anything else. Consent is not the only reason for processing data. It's not the only basis for processing data. But most of us don't think about it like that. In part because the US model is heavily consent and notice driven. But it doesn't have to be. There is nothing that stops technical solutions from going into play that could say, a really good example is the do not track functionality that was built into browsers and then basically killed very early on in the development of the web. There's nothing that stops technologies like that from limiting how data brokers use our data. There's nothing that stops technologies from controlling how many cookies are in place. It's just there's no incentive. There's no
incentive goes to the user. What about my use of the Brave browser and the do not track signals and other technologies? The consumer can take certain steps, but does not. Just because
I use Brave. It's great. Do not track doesn't get followed by the websites. Bottom line, it's not accepted in the standard, so it's not followed. So you can turn do not track on. Congratulations, I've done that. And maybe there's 5 sites out there. Like, I'm sure the privacy preserving folks out there who aren't really tracking cookies anyway would follow do not track. But there's no incumbency. There's no incumbency on the standard to force people to follow do not track. It just isn't a thing.
Should we throw our hands in the air and give up? Are these problems insurmountable?
No, not at all. They're not at all insurmountable. What we need to do is, to be honest, we need to be a little bit more like John Oliver, and we need to go and embarrass some politicians. We need to be more responsive and get more involved with actually pushing for laws. Like, what I would love to see VCs do more than anything else? I would love to see VCs get behind and actually fund politicians to pass some comprehensive privacy laws. I would love to see something that's not just whitewashed, consent and transparency. I would like to see something that says, we do need technical controls to be in place. We really do need privacy by design and default.
Commentary after commentary that really casts shade on the possibility, especially of a United States comprehensive privacy laws, simply because
I agree.
of the demographic of the political spectrum. It's just not possible, especially when a lot of our representatives are coming out of the great state of California. And there's just very little ground for medium, a middle ground to find a decent compromise. So I'm not realistic that there's a solution other than privacy by design, where those companies choose to use it as a benefit to their business model, and also consumer choice options that are given directly to the consumer to protect themselves and education. But those are such pale efforts that I have kind of given up on it. I don't think that, from a comprehensive perspective, we're going to see the privacy controls that we would like to see. But that doesn't mean we stop doing our job.
I think things are moving. In Europe, we've got the law, but we still don't have the practice. We only have few data protection authorities that have been fining and enforcing the law. But within the consumers, there's still a lot of people telling me, I don't care. They can follow me, they can put cookies, I don't care. Because they actually don't know what the data brokers industry is doing with the data. So control without transparency, without the real choice, doesn't work much.
I just tell my clients never to use their real identity. It's problem solved.
Hopefully your checks still go through.
Yeah, so I think the broader, and this is like just my perspective to it, and Jeff, I think that's where I've been behind, I think following your link about the vendor list you're trying to prepare. the thought that I have is like we should look at the broader problem, not just limiting to a particular geography. I mean, privacy is a global problem right now. I mean, I may be doing business with company A. It has a cloud server with company B, and it is trying to do business with the local company C, right? And they all can be geographically differently located, right? Now, in a way, I provide my info. It goes to three different vendors or three different companies. Now how do I make sure all of that is controlled in the rightful way? I mean, all it takes is a single leak, right? All it takes is one going rogue, and that's all could break the whole scheme of things. And I do like the idea which was shared in this call about monetizing or creating that visibility that, hey, let's see at the pockets of how we can achieve a full privacy framework, right? Privacy forward, and see who are the vendors doing good in certain aspects, and where are we having the lack. Like clearly, based on this conversation, we do not have a solution for non-human attested or control features about the nesting part of it, right? So if we can bring up a list which basically says, hey, these are the vendors, these do good with cookies, these do good with some kind of data mapping, but they're not really great with cross-border data movement, right? And I think that's where, as privacy folks with something where we want to achieve a nirvana state of privacy, we would, once we have that view, I think things we can pull together. So do like the idea which was shared in this call. And Jeff, I'm still looking forward for the list that you're preparing.
It'll be out soon. It does actually make me think of one interesting thing this group might be interested in. I've been working with a company actually on sort of a joint project with a University of Texas, and I think we're going to end up creating a very massive database that analyzes the privacy notices of all the data brokers and all the big brands across the world, and essentially machine read and analyze all those privacy notices and create just a massive database that compares them all on numerous different factors. That might be pretty interesting for this group.
It seems to me that the privacy notices don't actually fit with the real practice, especially with time.
Yeah, good point.
When they started 2018, it was more or less up to date eventually. 2 years later, they're just dormant documents that are on the website, and they're completely out of date. Something companies haven't get yet is that the privacy notice is not a one-off paper you put in the corner and you forget. A lot of practices are not what it says on the notice.
Well, if that's the case, maybe we can actually turn that into a business and report these companies to their attorney generals or DPOs or DPAs, right? So
the thing is, we are so far from compliance that this is just a small bit. I've been raising several complaints. The ICO has been actually one that I send an email again, and they said, oh, we haven't get a response yet, we will raise that internally. The French CNIL is investigating 2 of my complaints, but it's 2 out of 6, I think. And they've been investigating, I think one is 6 months. It takes a long time, and I'm still waiting to see what they're going to actually do.
All right.
There's another market for you. If someone in the privacy tech space wants to get involved in helping regulators speed up their process of investigations, I would put money towards that.
Wow.
There's one positive thing. The CNIL has now got a new decree allowing them to use a faster enforcement system.
That is an interesting idea. I like that idea, Carrie and Tara. Improve tech for DPAs to streamline enforcement, investigation, and action. That is interesting. All right, folks. Well, we're actually at the hour, so we're out of time. So this has been a really wide-ranging and interesting discussion. I want to thank Darius and Carrie and Jim and Tara and Prashant and Thomas. And did we miss anybody that is no longer up here? This has been really wonderful for me. I hope everybody else enjoyed it. Chris, thanks for everything as well. Any last-minute comments before we go?
Yeah, so Jeff and I are working on a website for this group, so where we can start aggregating the things that we're talking about and hopefully aggregate more useful resources for everybody to make these things happen. And maybe one last thing that I wanted to say that has been on my mind for a long time is we must make an example of one of those executives that profits from that, right? So the AG's office in DC tried it again last year by adding Mark Zuckerberg to a lawsuit that was somewhat too late. That's why the judge ultimately threw it out, because it was still based on the Cambridge Analytica debacle. If they had tried this earlier, then Zuckerberg would have been personally liable. And ultimately, I think that's what we need to do. This shouldn't be a business model, right? So social engineering as a service, as a business model is appalling from what I'm concerned. And then overall, I think we need to respect the nature of this global worldwide network as a commons that should serve everybody equally. And in order to do that, we just need to claim, the rights to our bytes ultimately, right? So that no one else can benefit from that unless they have our actual consent and can prove that they had it when they were using it, right? So I don't think it's a worthwhile business model for the world. I include general advertising in that. Initially, when we created .com for .commercial, that was the layer where commercial content was supposed to live, and unfortunately we didn't do that. So with that said, if you have ideas for other topics for the future, speakers, any interesting news, send them to me or Jeff, and we will organize these calls every Friday and eventually probably broaden the platform and maybe add video to it if there's demand for that. I streamed this today on YouTube. I'll send around the link. If anybody has a problem with that, just let me know and I'll delete it.
All right. Thanks, everyone. This has been Your Bytes, Your Rights with Chris and Jeff, Session 8. Have a great weekend.
Take care, everybody.